Hello, everyone. Hello. See some people trickling in. It's great to see everyone on a Sunday morning. I'll maybe kind of give a couple quick minutes here, and then kind of get right into the presentation. All right. I think we might go ahead and get started, and definitely if anyone else joins, right? I think we're having the session recorded as well, so you won't miss anything out at all. First off, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you all. My name is Karthik Ramachandran. I am a former BCG project leader. I was there actually right out of undergrad. I joined as an associate, got promoted to consultant, got to go on secondment, was sponsored for my MBA at Wharton, and then left last year as a project leader. And I now work on JCPenney's finance team. So I'm a director of finance, reporting to the CFO. I've really cherished the time I spent in consulting. It really opened a lot of doors for me. But what I'm really passionate about is case coaching and consulting prep coaching. And so a little bit of background on that. I actually, at the University of Texas at Austin, was when I first got interested in consulting. I got an internship with BCG, got my return offer and signed full time. And actually, I led our case prep organization at UT. And it was actually the organization that was responsible for 80 to 90% of top tier consulting firm offers on campus. And so I love the process of, dissecting the interview process, down to kind of a methodical way that you can prepare for it, a digestible way, and honestly, a fun way too, because I know that, it can be a very high stress process. I was involved as an interviewer at BCG as well. Involved also in terms of both formally and informally preparing candidates for their interviews. And then I actually took that to Wharton as well, where I led our case preparation organization on campus at Wharton as well. And, we had, I think, anywhere from 200 to 250 people every year going into consulting careers. So it's a process I'm very familiar with. And so with that, wanted to kind of keep an open Q&A here. Honestly, this is just want to be as helpful as I can to all of you. And I think the way we'll probably do it today, just because we have a lot of attendees here, and want to make sure I get to as many questions as possible, is if you have a question, please feel free to put it into the chat. And I'll try to get to those in the order that I see them in the chat. And if we come up on time and we're not able to kind of get through all of them, I'm also absolutely happy to get on an intro call with any of you and talk through any of those questions at that time as well. I'm really excited by the prospect of getting to meet and potentially working with a lot of you as well. Maybe kind of as a thought starter, are there any of the questions, or topics on the slide right now that you all feel might be most interesting for me to quickly cover? Okay, great. I see something from Andrew. So I'll start off with that one then. So how did I get my start in consulting? I actually first got exposed to it by talking to families and friends. So I was an undergrad. I was a business major, and I think one of the first things that, for better or for worse, that a lot of, underclassmen get funneled into is, hey, are you interested in doing consulting or banking? And for me, of course, I hadn't been a consultant or a banker, so I didn't exactly know what that answer would be. But what I did know is I really loved all of my different business classes. And it wasn't just, finance or accounting that I really enjoyed. I liked marketing. I liked operations. I liked the organizational behavior topics that we did. And so I wanted a career that would give me as much broad-based exposure functionally as well as from an industry standpoint as possible. And so I was very fortunate that at UT we kind of had this culture of paying it forward, where the upperclassmen that secured internships, secured full-time offers, oftentimes kind of led their guidance and their perspective to underclassmen that were interested. And so that was really my first foray to kind of get me started in consulting. And I actually first started that in the Dallas office of BCG. Great. So I think that hits a little bit of Mei Ying's question as well. I mean, I think an additional thing I'd say about choosing a career in consulting was I really wanted to work on interesting problems with interesting and humble people that were focused on developing others. And I got all of those in consulting. So sorry about that. So I see a question from PA. There's a common myth that consulting is more about frameworks, so they're typically looking for candidates with academic achievements. What are your thoughts on this? So I think actually one of the biggest misconceptions is that, everything about consulting firms is, you having this like portfolio of 30 frameworks that you just dish out based upon what seems relevant. I actually think it's different. I think consulting firms are looking for people that are first and foremost intellectually curious. So the types that when they hear a fact or they hear something of note, don't just want to stop there, want to kind of get deeper, want to get into the drivers of the answers behind that thing, want to get into how those learnings might be applicable somewhere else. And so I think that's first and foremost what they look for. And I think secondarily, what they look for is people that have the ability to put together a structured approach to solving ambiguous problems. And so what that means is, as a consultant, you're never going to be the most experienced person in the room. Just never will be, right? You likely are going to be working with clients where, let's say you're working with an oil and gas client, the, chief supply chain officer might have been there for 30 years. And there's no chance as, a new associate or a consultant, you've been there for 30 years. But do you have the ability to kind of put together a logical approach to getting progress on a core issue? Can you ask the right questions in a kind of incisive but respectful manner? Are you collegial? Are you able to bring clients along the way? And so I wouldn't say I would go as far as saying that only high academic achievements matter. I think that, of course, if you have good academic achievements, it doesn't hurt, and it's helpful to kind of show that you're intellectually curious to some extent. But there are definitely ways to show that in the case interview process beyond just your academic achievements. I think that kind of hits Jack's question, which is what are the characteristics, qualities, and achievements? I think the characteristics, right, are that intellectual curiosity, that ability to put a structured approach. I'd say another aspect is, ultimately consulting firms for their associate and consultant roles are not hiring, purely people that are, let's say, data scientists, nor are they hiring people that are like purely like poets. And what I mean by that is, typical people that, might be doing liberal arts majors or history or classics or something like that. What they really look for is kind of somebody that shows an ability to be both right-brained and left-brained. So I always kind of joke, right? Like a great consulting candidate would be somebody that was a computer science major that also loved to kind of do poetry on the side, or someone that majored in art history that also really enjoyed doing kind of statistical analysis projects in their free time. So I think a blend of that left and right brain is another really positive thing that consulting firms look for. And I'd also say that you don't have to be a business major, especially kind of post undergrad or anything like that, to enter. They really are looking for those intellectually curious people across backgrounds. So the next question is, what are the growth aspects of subject matter experts in consulting wanting to pivot from manufacturing to consulting into industry consulting? So I think that kind of the crux of the question is like, what role do subject matter experts have in consulting? And what I'd say is, the consulting firms that you know of, your McKinsey's, Bain's, BCG's, Deloitte's of the world, especially McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, back if you looked in the 80s, 90s, were very much generalist consulting firms. So they worked purely on strategy, high level projects. I think what you see more and more of is clients are really demanding more of kind of value being proven. And so you have a lot more longer term engagements, I'd say, a lot more operational aspects to engagements. And so actually what you see is that a lot of these firms are hiring subject matter experts as either what we call expert track consultants, or they will hire them into like a traditional management consulting track, but where their focus would be in a functional area, maybe manufacturing, supply chain operations, for example, where they're still involved on the commercial side of things, but they have a very clear functional expertise that they're trying to bring in. And so that's been a trend that all of the firms are prioritizing more and more. And so I think that that's definitely a background that even if you wanted to break into the quote unquote generalist consulting firms, you're going to, be very, very compelling and competitive with. So I get another question of I'm often told that top consulting firms only hire those that went to Ivy League schools. Does this ring true? If not, how would one navigate it? So I'll say this, right? So the concept of target schools for consulting firms definitely exists. It's a way for them to kind of quickly get access to candidates. That being said, you'll find people from all kinds of small liberal arts schools, smaller state schools, less known state schools, even like international schools, actually get into the top firms and do extremely well in them. And so it does take a little bit more legwork. I think the navigation aspect requires you to kind of do a little bit more networking and cold reach outs and whatnot to people in the offices you're interested in. Potentially, going through a coach or something like that to help make a connection with somebody that can listen to your story and hear more about your experience and what you'd bring to the table. And like really, I think the best way you can kind of get a leg up is to get a referral in from somebody that is within these firms, because even these firms will do off-cycle hiring. Oftentimes they'll have an open application, but having a referral attached to it is really helpful. And so I'd say those are aspects that you should really try to prioritize if you're not at, let's say, a school where the firms have like a very large presence. On the Ivy League part of it, I'd say, again, a lot of the Ivy League schools are your targets, but I went to the University of Texas for undergrad and I got into BCG after. And definitely at Texas, we had a consulting presence. It may not have been as extensive as the Ivy League schools, but I definitely think it is an industry you can break into even if you don't have, a pure Ivy League background. And so I heard you mentioned that you were already involved in casing and interned at BCG to get a return offer. What do you recommend and how do you see the path for someone that gained the interest somewhat late? So I'd say definitely it's a process where the less lead time that you have for preparation. So let's say you start in July or in August, and the interviews are coming up in September. The more critical it is that you really have the path and the way shown by somebody that has been very well versed with the interview process. I always say like a consulting case coach is very much like a personal trainer in the gym where, they can't lift the weight for you. They can't, literally get you into shape, but what they can do is they can guide you on the best ways, the best form to have, the best practices to use. And they can really kind of simplify the process. So what might take you 50, 60, 70 cases of work without a case coach because you're not really kind of focused on preparing in the right areas, you'll do a lot better by focusing on specific case muscles that you need to build. And so for me, I always coach my mentees from looking at the 5 stages of the case interview. And, different coaches have different names for this, but there's a clarification phase where you're trying to establish the objective. There's frameworking where you're putting structure around your problem solving approach. There's quantitative where you're typically doing some number crunching, analytical work, or chart reading. Qualitative where you get to the, so what of the numbers. And then a synthesis where you recap the case. And so the real value I'd say for someone starting late is get a coach, have them really focus their feedback tactically, very tangibly on what went right and what you should do differently within each of these different areas as you kind of do cases. And what you'll realize is that with a much smaller number of cases, you'll see an movement up the improvement curve much, much faster. And so then the next question I see is, as you know, the competitiveness of entering the consulting industry has increased massively. What would you say is the best way to approach starting a career in consulting today? So I think the first thing is this, first realizing that it is more competitive, but there are still very much spots for people that are, well qualified, that show a lot of the things that I was talking about earlier. And so I'd say enter with, the positivity that, you absolutely can be ready for this process and be competitive and break into the industry. I would say that there's a lot of, I think, doomsdaying that I've heard about, is now just a time when it's impossible to get into consulting. And I think that that's the first mental block to really break down. And then I'd say the other aspect is kind of also keeping a more holistic perspective of, the entry points into consulting, of course, are like the cycle at hand right now, but it can even be a year down the line, a couple years down the line. And the absolute best thing you can do is to start cultivating what I call a consulting-based perspective to actually solving problems. So when you get an ambiguous problem that you might not be a subject matter expert in, are you able to kind of think logically about what are maybe the 3-4 main areas you want to tackle? How do you kind of think about the sub buckets that create those areas? How do you show a way of prioritizing between those areas? How do you get a good question list together to make progress when you ask somebody to kind of give you inputs? And so that way of thinking, is going to apply whether you are immediately in consulting or whether let's say you're in a strategy adjacent role first and then you want to move to consulting, or whether let's say you're even in a non-business role and then you see consulting as rounding out your skill set later on. And so I'd say the best way to approach is honestly just get started. I think a lot of people are afraid to jump into case interviews, afraid to, get that coaching, get that first kind of steps and forays into learning the process. And I'd say that's the best thing you can do to both be competitive now and prepare yourself if you want to move in the future as well. So the next question is, what are some tips you would give to someone who is trying to break into consulting without the academic background or any experience? So I think there's a couple fold, right? I think that there is probably a strategizing session that needs to happen probably between you and a coach, of just, okay, like what do we see as the strengths in your profile? So what are the analytical strengths you're showing? What experiences show that you're a great team player, that you have good leadership? And I think like a really deliberate review of those kinds of things can help actually elucidate areas where you've had experience, even if it's not something that maybe you immediately consider as like typical experience, like an internship or whatnot. And in cases where, let's say, you have an academic background where either you're not in a major that typically goes into consulting, or let's say maybe your GPA is not as strong as you need it to be. I mean, for a host of those reasons, I think having a coach like give you an honest assessment of, hey, does it make sense for you to apply in a cycle right now? Does it make sense for you to maybe get that kind of experience or kind of alleviate those types of concerns via either testing or test scores or like other kinds of experience? I think honestly, it's going to be a very person specific assessment, and so I'd say that that's the kind of thing that I'd be happy to, of course, explore in an introductory call with any of you. Is your specific profile and how we kind of think both realistically, but also kind of aspirationally about how to be competitive for the consulting industry. Great. So, do you have tips on the BCG one-way video interview and cover letter? Who've used this? Do interviewers from each round review this? Um, Let me. Sorry, I think it jumped a little bit for me. So, I'd say the biggest thing is like for a cover letter, the biggest thing is being able to show that you have interest in the specific firm. You're able to kind of speak to specific offerings at that firm that interest you, that are fits with your long-term goals and aspirations, and that you're kind of self-reflective. You think about the choices you made academically and why you made those choices and how that's led you to wanting to pursue a consulting career. I think on the one-way video interview, I think what you're meaning is that first kind of um, online case interview, and what they're honestly looking for is very much the same kinds of things that they look for in a live case interview. But instead of having a live case interviewer, you have a series of prompts that will lead you through and ask you specific pointed questions about the case at hand. And so I always say the best way to prepare for that is honestly just to prepare for live case interviews. Because if you can do a live case interview with the pressure of another person giving you a case and the such, you'll be able to kind of go through that multiple choice like video interview. And most importantly, when you record your synthesis and your recommendation via video, you'll feel very comfortable as though it's a live setting. And so that's the best thing I can say. I'd say the biggest tips are making sure that you're thoughtful, making sure that you're measured in the pacing that you use, and making sure that your affect is very positive. Smiling is a good thing. Eye contact is a great thing. In addition to, of course, right, like all the things that you need to do with typical case interviews of preparing across the different stages of a case interview and getting good coaching and this and such. I see a question. I'm interested in two different roles in McKinsey. Would it possibly be one in the US, one in London? Would it be possible to apply for both roles and interview at the same time? I'm not completely familiar exactly with McKinsey, I would say, on this, but I have heard that a lot of these firms typically you submit a single application and then you like rank your different choices of the offices. Now, if let's say the different roles you're meaning is like one was a data scientist role and one was a management consultant role, then I imagine there'd be no issue with you trying to apply for both. But typically, if it's the exact same role, it would be kind of you ranking the offices that you're interested in. MBB firms ask for high school grades for an internship. Considering that I'm now graduating for a master's, why do they ask for this? So that's interesting. Actually, when I was recruiting, I don't remember them asking for high school grades. I remember them asking for our SAT, and that was largely because, especially from master's programs, you're oftentimes recruiting for the same roles as post undergrad roles, unless it's an MBA, a JD, or an MD. And so, with that in mind, like I remember them asking for an SAT, but I didn't remember them asking for the last 2 years of high school. I think the biggest thing is like don't stress too much about it being kind of a deal breaker or a deal maker on it. I think it's just an additional piece of data to help round out the thinking and assessment of your academic profile. And so obviously, if let's say your GPA in college is a little bit lower, but you are a very strong, high school candidate, maybe like a salutatorian, top ranker of some sorts. I mean, whatever it might be, it can be a way to kind of help round out that profile and alleviate some of that concerns. And so that's I think some of the rationale for it. I agree with you. I'm not the biggest fan of using high school grades for somebody already in their masters, but certainly if you've taken, let's say, like a GRE for your masters and you've done well, I absolutely think you should apply. You should include that as part of your application, your resume as well. Next question is our first and second round interviews. Sorry, it's questions are coming in fast. One second. Yeah, so our first and second round interviews at BCG stand alone, or will interviewers have access to notes from your first round interviews? So I'd say that they would have access to your notes kind of coming in, but largely they make their assessment on that round at hand. And so, if you made a mistake on your mental math or something in a first round interview, it's not like you're doomed for their assessment of your quantitative abilities in your second round. I think it's more of to kind of say, hey, like, FYI, maybe this candidate had a great overall case, but they didn't have the most structured buckets. Like I would try to probe a little bit more there. But then they'll give you a very fair shot in your second round interview in terms of your frameworking in that case itself. So I wouldn't worry about it kind of being a like any kind of like a colored glasses type of a thing for your candidacy in the future rounds. Is it worth breaking into consulting for someone with a core international law and working on development project background? I noticed that Bain and Company and Accenture, as well as McKinsey, do a lot of social impact work, but don't know how to show correlation. So I think this is a very kind of personalized question, and I would love to kind of work with you in a 15-minute intro call on this, as well as future sessions. But I think the key here is being able to draw a good career and story and trajectory between the academic choices you made to the professional choices, like in the professional experiences that you pursued, to then how consulting is the next step in that journey. And so that story is going to look a little different from each person for each person, but the crux is having that like very tight, very kind of cohesive story across those different steps. And so don't want to kind of get too much into one specific detail here, but happy to kind of take that offline and do an intro call on that. If we don't get into MBB in this cycle, what are some options of jobs? Sorry, it keeps jumping here. We could do that could help us transition into MBB in the next couple of years. So the good thing is this: I think that MBB is not like one of those things where if you don't get in one cycle, you're jaded for the future or anything like that. I know a lot of people that applied out of undergrad that didn't get an offer, that went and did either, let's say, product management work or software engineering or strategy or finance or anything, and then went and did an MBA and then were fully recruited. And actually, I know one such candidate who started her career at Capital One on the product strategy side of things, and actually did an MBA and got offers at all three of McKinsey, Bain, and BCG in the same office. And so I would say, like, that's always a path you can take. I'd say another path you can always take is the industry hiring path, which is if you do any other kind of a job, and it could be in any other field, it doesn't have to be in strategy, you can apply kind of a year out, 2 years out in the off-cycle industry hiring of these firms. And from my knowledge, McKinsey and BCG have a more kind of established process for that, as just like firms that have been around longer. But it's certainly an avenue that you can use. And every year, I know BCG brings in a large number of candidates that are industry hires that they feel would make great consultants as well, but have the benefit of having other industry and job experience. And so some of those jobs could be, corporate strategy. Some of those could be finance or corporate finance. For a life sciences PhD, I think it could even be something in research or anything, like in the medical like device space. I could see as being very interesting. So I think there's a lot of options on that front. And again, right, I think that it's helpful to have a cohesive story. So I think I'd love to work with you or anyone else that has a specific profile that are looking to try to break in as an industry hire. I see. Have you ever worked on procurement and supply chain projects? If yes, what was that like? I did actually. I mean, I'd say it's maybe more of an operations project, but I worked actually with a large pharmaceutical company, so one of the largest ones that you've heard of, and they were doing their plant network strategy, which is essentially they have a bunch of production plants for various drugs that they are producing now that also have certain product specifications that allow them to potentially produce different drugs in the future as well. And so what they were trying to assess was what should that go forward footprint look like over a 15-year period, and how should we think about capacities that exist within each of those plants, so that in case market dynamics change, we are able to respond to the demand, but we're not incurring unnecessary fixed costs either, in periods where, let's say, demand is lower. And so I really enjoyed it. We got to actually like walk the floors of specific production plants, ask questions of line managers there that I thought was really interesting. And then obviously there was a strong analytical component as well. We got to run some Monte Carlo simulations on what different demand levels might look like, and what the relative profitability of the company would look like accordingly. And so I found it a very cool mixture of like on the ground, like learning about the business with some of the more analytical tools to get to insight. Next question I get is, what would you advise an undergrad with some work experiences with limited scope of work and results, average GPA, good leadership experience to prepare? So I think in a case like this, what I would say is, you have to figure out how to play up your strengths. And so if through the leadership experiences, you can talk about how you adjudicated, conflicts, how you developed action plans, how you executed to get to results, how you integrated different perspectives or different stakeholders in different areas. Like those are all things that even if it isn't in a work context, so to speak, can really shoot well if it's in a leadership experience standpoint. You have to realize that a lot of undergrads that are applying for internships may have one, a maximum of two maybe internships like prior to that junior year internship. And so when they're recruiting with these firms, a lot of the stories that they present about their background are not from formal internship experience or whatnot, but actually from their extracurricular activities and their leadership experiences. So I think on something like that, the best thing you can do is like have a really good resume review, story review session with a coach to help you brainstorm, rewrite some of those bullets to be more results oriented, action oriented. While simultaneously, looking for the nuggets that are very valuable in maybe the limited experience that you have or whatnot. And I think there's also, ways to kind of play up some of the academic aspects where even if you have an average GPA, if you did a lot of side academic projects, for example, where you analyzed data and got to interesting conclusions, and if those were then subsequently presented to, a business owner or something, those are great experiences that you can use to help kind of defray some of the average academic aspects of your profile. All right, so let me. Okay, and I think the associated question was best practices to be a stellar case interviewee. I think honestly those would be related to the stages of the case interview, which is making sure that you're asking clear and articulate questions when you're clarifying the objective, making sure you're asking questions to help hone in a framework, making sure your framework has enough detail while still being very structured and comprehensive in nature, but you being able to show priorities in that frameworking aspect, making sure your quantitative is very sequential in nature, logical, well articulated, and that you're talking through your thought process with your interviewer, and of course getting to the right numbers. And then on the qualitative side, right, like getting to good insights, maybe third order insights, and marry different learnings across the case, and then being able to kind of succinctly put it into a recommendation. Those are the high level best practices, but of course, right, the devil's in the details then, and that's where case prep comes in. What are the emerging trends in consulting that new participants should be aware of, and how can I prepare for them? So I'd say, a big emerging trend is one that I mentioned earlier, which is the rise of more and more specialist individuals. And so I don't think that means you have to be a specialist already in order to get into consulting, but I think it does help for you to kind of have more of an articulated, clear perspective of the areas of business you're interested in, the industries you want to work in, the functions you want to work in, where you see your career trajectory over 5, 10 years. And then I think, from a more functional standpoint, showing that you're kind of interested or knowledgeable about, things like, AI and how they've, impacted consulting. So how is, like, what are use cases that you can review ahead of time of how, let's say, a BCG or a McKinsey or a Bain have used AI to help service their clients better, and being kind of able to talk to, your knowledge of that and your excitement for those kinds of projects, I think is a really important thing. And then the final question is, I talked with someone at BCG about hiring freezes and the recent wanes in demand for consulting firms. Do you feel like consulting is a recession-proof industry or not? So I'll say this. I think that there's no such thing as a completely recession-proof industry, except for maybe something like, I don't know, utilities or something like that. But I'd say consulting, like other, industries, can be dependent upon the economy. But that being said, by and large, versus like, let's say, marketing or like highly differentiation-based offerings, like top-line based consulting firms, or like top-line based services, consulting actually does reasonably well in down periods. And the reason for that is companies and clients actually move less from like strategy projects and top line projects and marketing projects to more like, cost savings projects, organizational redesign projects, transformation projects, like initiative execution and value capture projects. And so I know that there are hiring freezes. That's oftentimes in response to times when actually, consulting was doing extremely well and they potentially overhired. And what I'll say is that, there might be small dips and wanes here and there for demands in consulting, but by and large, I'd say that, demand is in aggregate just really increasing. If you look at, year over year CAGRs for a lot of these top consulting firms, they're typically in the high single digits, low double digits. And that has held, very much even through, 2008, financial crises, like other recessions and the such. And so, I would feel confident, like, yes, things might, like, work might look a little different in a recession period. But it certainly doesn't mean that, you're not going to have an opportunity to do good work in consulting, nor is, demand completely gone or anything like that. Great. Um, I think I've hit all the questions I see in the chat. Um, if anyone has anything specific, I'm happy to take it in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I can take maybe the last couple questions. I'd say the other thing is, like, I'm, really excited by the possibility of potentially, working with some of you as you, get through your candidacy on the consulting side of things. And so, I hope everyone can everyone see my screen still? If anyone can just put like a yes or a thumbs up in the chat, that'd be great. Oh, perfect. Great. So I like I love for the opportunity to work with any or all of you. And happy to do an introductory call to talk with you, talk about your goals, talk about an action plan we can create. And actually, this week only through next Sunday, I have a discount code of an additional 10% off hourly and package services, and so that's actually above and beyond any discount that's baked into the packages. So typically, I offer for a 10 session package, it's usually a 10% discount. This would be 10% on top of that 10% discount. And so happy to kind of work with many of you, and, really, really looking forward to that as well. And so, I think that concludes it. I see maybe one last question that I'll answer. But then, happy to take any additional questions in an intro call or offline as well. And I know the session's being recorded, so, really hope this was helpful, and hope that it was, insightful for you all. And so with that, I'll kind of answer this last question, which is, how do you approach recruiting as an experienced hire looking to break into consulting? And so I'd say the first thing is, there's two aspects. One is understanding your own candidacy. So understanding what your story is, what your learnings and your different roles in your industry have been, how that would translate to you being a client facing member of a consulting team in that industry potentially, and what skills you're looking to round out that maybe you haven't gotten to cover yet in your existing industry role. And then, so that's one aspect, your candidacy. The other aspect is, how do you actually make connections with people that have similar profiles as you, that are in offices that you're interested in? And so, let's say you're someone that worked in semiconductors. I would, heavy duty look into LinkedIn and find people that were maybe at an Intel, at a Qualcomm, at Nvidia, that before business school, and then went to business school and then made a pivot into consulting, for example. And so, really kind of making a portfolio of those potential mentors to help pick their brain, get a sense of how they pitch their own story, get a sense of how they navigated the process, I think is really helpful for your specific kind of situation at hand. And so that's something that we can absolutely strategize together in our sessions together. Great. Well, I think if that's it, thank you all so much. Really, really appreciate it. And please feel free to reach out via the links that were presented in the presentations today. And I'm also going to drop in the chat, my my profile page. I think it should be through the accessible through the QR codes as well. But I'm going to post it in the chat right here too, for anyone that wants to wants to join it. So thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your Sunday to everyone.